With God, there is always more. More love, more life, more freedom. Welcome to Zoweh's Exploring More with Michael Thompson. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "Our Heavenly Father has provided many delightful ends for us along our journey, but He takes great care to see that we do not mistake any of them for home." Join me and the team as we explore the kingdom together, discovering the deep truths and offering encouragement for the journey. There is always more. Welcome, friends and allies, to the Exploring More podcast. My name's Michael Thompson, and I am with three fabulous women, mothers, and we are starting part 2 of our 3-part series, actually, on the mother's heart. And so, to my right, Sherry Jennings, beautiful bride of SJ, and Rebecca Burnett, also known as RB. We're big on initials around here sometimes. RB, Rebecca Burnett, who is the spouse and best friend of our good friend, David Burnett. Shout out to David. Mm-hmm. And Robin Thompson, my favorite of the three. That doesn't make you two feel bad, does it?
No.
Good.
I prefer that.
All right. So, talking about a mother's heart. And we finished the last podcast, Sherry, you started to just kind of crest this hill in the idea of what God's been doing. We talk about orientation. We talk about it's a man or it's a woman who knows who they are, where they are, and the good that God's up to in their lives. And you started talking about the good God's up to in your life as a mother. And it's not easy. The good isn't always easy. Good and easy aren't the same thing. We're not talking about icing and candles and wrapping paper. Some of the gifts are pretty prickly. And in fatherhood, as in motherhood, some of the things that God's up to in a woman's heart is healing and training, healing her so she can be who He made her to be, and training her up in that way, how she uniquely bears God's image, just like you talked about last week, Robin. Can we just pick up there? I'm kind of high diving this. Let's go into the deeper water of what has God shown you about who you are in the kingdom through the lane of motherhood? And, P.S., what has He shown you of who you aren't through the lane of motherhood? How's that for a big question?
That ought to do it.
Where do you go with that, moms?
I guess I can speak to that. Honestly, I feel like when you ask me how God has met me as a mom, it's such a huge,
Question.
There's so many things I could say. There was as a single mom, how He met me. Just
okay, start there. But let me just say the caveat for how we want to live in the kingdom is we promote the idea of living in the kingdom awake, living in the kingdom observant, living in the kingdom discerning. I think a lot of people throw that phrase around. I know you're not. Oh, I could tell you a lot of things. What I like to say is, okay, give me 3, give me 2, tell me. And they say that generally because I think we know we're supposed to as believers, as Christ followers. But what I love is when somebody really says, well, let me show you one. Let me tell you a story about what He did yesterday. Let me tell you a story about what He did this morning. That's awake and oriented and discerning. What is the good that God's up to in your life? If you say, oh, lots of stuff, especially as a mom, or I think that's what the Exploring More podcast is all about, right, Rebecca? What is it that you could specifically share, the stories? The theology is important, but the stories that make that theology come to life, come to color, and are the beautiful tales of the kingdom that we can share. You got me up on my, up on my box for a minute, because we want to tell those kind of stories because there's not enough of them being told. And far too many friends and allies aren't experiencing this life. Mm-hmm. So even though we're talking about motherhood and Mother's Day and a mother's heart, it's in this bigger context of Zoweh and what we explore and have the privilege of exploring. Even off mic, you said, you know what I love? Doing this with my friends. Mm-hmm. We're just having conversations about the good that God's up to in our lives, some of the hardship that we're promised in the scriptures, but for a reason. And it's for your healing and for your training in being an image bearer and becoming truly who you are and who He made you to be before the world got a hold of you and the enemy came to steal, kill, and destroy. So with that as a backdrop, let me just elevate the question even more.
Wow.
Would you please talk as a single mom? Because Sherry, you had that time too, where for a time you and SJ broke things off, and I love when you guys share our divorce didn't work out and you came back together, but there was a single parent season in your life. But I think as a single mom, would you share a little bit about what could be the good in the world that God would be up to in those kinds of circumstances? And who can blame listeners who are upset, angry, frustrated? They didn't want that. And yet that's how their story unfolded in those chapters. So how did God meet you in that time and space?
I think the primary theme of every response I could possibly have in this moment is I feel like I really believe that parenting and God as a parent, the way mothers resemble God, bear God, is God customizes his love. Like I tell my children, my goal isn't fair love. My goal is customized love to bring each of you, wherever you are, to the next life-giving step for you. So I think that is what I've experienced of God. And so as a single mom, God just knew, of course he did, he knew what I needed most at that time. And I was feeling so alone, so unseen. I had the theology, I did, and I had lived it my entire life. I was brought up in the church, and I did believe it, but my heart was having a hard time feeling it. And it was just the loneliest time of my entire life. And it was about 6 or 7 years long. And I remember one day I had my 2 boys at Cece's Pizza, and with all these questions in my heart about every single thing. And we're sitting there eating pizza. I probably wasn't because I'm a diabetic and shouldn't have been. So I was probably doing it for my boys, which is what we do. And a man came up to me, this older man, an African American, and he said to me, "Ma'am, can I just tell you something?" And I said, "Sure." He said, "I kept arguing with God. God kept saying, no, you have to go over there and talk to her and tell her." And I kept saying, "God, can't I just pray for her?" And God said, "No, you can't. You have to go talk to her." And he said, "God just told me he wants you to know that he sees you and he loves you." And it was the closest thing I've ever had to an angelic experience. I mean, it may have been, I don't know, because it was nothing anyone could have said to me would have made more of a difference. So to your point of what has God been showing you about who you are, foundationally, that I am seen and I am loved. And then, of course, healing came over the years from that. But that was a groundbreaking moment. Those years that seemed to drag on where God just met me, and through experiences like that, through provision, I can't tell you how many thousands of dollars I got in my mailbox or under my doormat, or Starbucks cards passed to me in the aisles at church, or, just lavish. My former mother-in-law took me on a cruise. And that speaks to the beauty. I keep saying how much beauty matters to me. Like, he just met me in all the ways that mattered to me as a single mom. And then now as a mother, he knew I was ready for the next stage of my education as a mother.
Journey, right?
Yeah. Who was it? Allender, who wrote that book, How Children Raise Parents. And anyway, he brought me David, and also that book by Danny Silk. Just epiphanies.
Loving your kids on purpose.
Yes, and I'm sure we'll talk about that more later, but more to the point that I made earlier, that I believe that what he does is he sees us and he knows where we are, each of us, and what the next most important step is for each of us. Like, for example, right now, for whatever reason, and I think maybe a lot of moms will resonate with this, I'm in this place where I get almost panicky because I need solitude. Like, if I don't get it, I might just explode or melt, or some weird combination of both. I just almost can get in a panic over just needing some moments of quiet. And what he's been teaching me is, a couple years ago, he started by introducing me to the Holy Spirit in groundbreaking new ways. And he's been in the process of teaching me that I carry my rest with me. And so my 2 oldest girls and I are getting ready to go to Africa to visit my sister. And I know that I'm going to have 10 days sharing a room with my girls, sharing everything. It's going to be right with them. And I could get a little panicky, but he's been teaching me to center, to refresh, to renew by pausing and just remembering that I am caught up, woven up into the Trinity. And I carry that peace with me because that's what I need right now. That is where I am. That is where my upgrade is required. And that is what he's offering me.
Yeah.
And of course, because it's me, one of the largest ways he does this is through beauty. Like birds, just the way they nurture and just have a way of bringing me back to these truthful things. So those are just a couple stories, and I could say more.
Let me connect a couple dots that I heard. So solitude is an incredible way to experience peace. But what you're saying is that some of the good God's up to in your life is showing you that there's other ways that you actually carry this peace with you. And the absence or the lack thereof of other people next to you, you're in this training module of learning how to experience peace. Wow, my daughters are with me all the time. There's other people on this plane. We're moving, we're going. What an incredible idea. And when I think about image bearing, Jesus had this going on all the time, multitudes pursuing him, and yet the solitude that's also needed to pull away. So how do I do that? What a great training module. What a hard training module. The other thing you said that I think is important for our conversation, particularly about motherhood, is in that single parent season, which was 6 years, when that angel, the message that he delivered to you was, I see you. You're known. And as that mends this single parent woman's heart, and that becomes more true for Rebecca, guess what she can then say to her kids? What do her kids need? They need a mama.
I see you and I love you.
Yes. Amen.
Yeah.
I just have to connect that for our listeners and for that's how your healing and the restoration of your heart in those broken moments will not be wasted. It will be for you. And the other side of the coin is, and then eventually it will be for others. And when you're a mom or a dad, that message has to be conveyed to your kids. I see you. I love what I see. I know you. But when you're stuck and the enemy wants to stick you in that brokenness, you really can't see beyond your needs. That's very difficult for a mom or dad to then bestow upon their littles, however big they may be. I see you. I love what I see. You're known. Let me help you. All these other things. If we can't receive that, it's very, very hard to deal that.
Yeah. We can only pass on what we've experienced and tasted.
And so if we're passing on brokenness, unhealedness, men, women, fathers, mothers, sons, daughters, our championing for community, redemptive community is get your heart back. Experience the healing that's available to you so you can be available to others in ways that you can't when you're hurt. And as a single parent and going through that season, that's such an incredible story and invitation. I want to say lesson, but then it makes it sound so academic.
Oh no, it was really nothing academic.
It's an illustration of the goodness of God. How about you, Sherry? When you went through that season, anything to reflect on of how did God come for your heart? What did God show you about himself in that time?
Absolutely. And I love how beautifully different it is than yours, Rebecca, because our time apart was only a little more than a year, maybe 18 months. And in that, I didn't have a lifetime of theology to fall back on. I had always been a planner. I had always been 6 thoughts ahead, planning out. I had everything figured out until I didn't. And the beautiful invitation for me in that time was being present, being in the moment, slowing everything down because everything felt so uncertain. But at the same time, having this incredible confidence that it was good. I mean, it clearly was not going according to plan, but there was clearly something good going on. And so just that day to day, that taking it moment by moment, that freedom of, I don't know what we're doing after school. So let's do this. Just that beautiful invitation to be free was a big part of that 18 months for me.
Which is also critical for our children. If we're not operating in freedom, then we can't offer them freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If we're hoarding and self-protecting because we don't know we're loved, then we can't offer the freedom to them.
And some of this pain is so hard and heavy and real in the single parenting idea, whatever made you that way. And so some of us have wounds in our childhood of having to be the parent for our mom or dad, having to hold things together. And that's not wrong, but if that goes
It's
on
not
and
what
on,
we were meant
it's
for.
not necessarily good.
Mm-mm.
So in that space of pain, motherhood is interrupted because now you're on your own in it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a very challenging. I love that you said my story is different. I mean, we're not offering a recipe. We're not offering a system to get through that. We're offering an invitation to walk with God and to try to help our friends and allies find that way and to be a resource and encouragement for them as we tell our stories, that somebody out there might say, I'd like to talk to Sherry, or I'd like to know how Rebecca's doing that. So that's the beauty of those stories. Thanks for sharing them. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll be right back with our part 2 of The Mother's Heart.
Hey, Exploring More podcast listeners, this is SJ, and I just wanted to bring something to your attention really quickly. We have a weekend for women coming up in September. It's Friday, September 6th through Sunday, September 8th, and it's something called the Women's Deepening Weekend. Some of you may be familiar with this weekend. Your wives or the women in your life maybe have attended, but if not, we want to encourage you, hey, maybe as a gift for Mother's Day, for a birthday, whatever you think might be appropriate, not just for your wives, but also other women in your life. Maybe you've got daughters or your mom or aunts or whatever that looks like for you. But we want to invite you to invite them to spend a beautiful weekend in September uncovering the truth that they are seen, known, and extravagantly loved. You can get more details about the Women's Deepening Weekend by visiting Zoweh.org/the-deepening-weekend or visit Zoweh.org/events to see all of the events that we have coming up in the near future. We hope you'll take the opportunity to invite the women in your life to a weekend away for their hearts. Visit Zoweh.org for more information.
Welcome back to the Exploring More podcast. Off mic, I get a tug from Robin. I didn't get to share yet.
I have something to share.
So we're going right to Robin. So go ahead.
Well, the question was how God has met you in being a mom and showing you his loving character as a mother, and really how he's met me as a human, as a person, as a woman, and then the impact that has then had on me being a mom. I grew up in a very religious context, similar to Rebecca, with my dad being a pastor and in a Christian school that was in a church, and all I knew were believers. So everything that I ever knew of God was absolutely understood that he loves me. Yet there were these underlying, more than underlying, overtly religious themes of obedience and service and duty. And I felt like I was trying to make up for all the ways that I had failed him and disappointed him. I felt like, and Rebecca and I have talked about this a lot, I knew he loved me and it was unconditional because that's what I heard of his love. And I had experienced some of that growing up for sure, but it was his delight that I did not know. I didn't know he delighted in me. And so about 15 years ago, understanding the heart of God towards me, how he delighted in me and delights in me and wants to be with me, how he rejoices in me and sings over me. My name is written in the palm of his hand. I'm held in his hand. He cherishes me and enjoys me. And all those things, when I started to understand those and then have been experiencing those things, then I'm able to realize it's living in his affection for me. There was a huge shift for Michael and me when we both started knowing and understanding this and experiencing this, that then it started to trickle down to our parenting and being able to enjoy our children and delight in them from a very different heart and from a very different place. And so instead of trying not to mess up as much, I think I've viewed God as just tolerating me and putting up with me because of my mistakes and because of how much I had failed him. I was a disappointment, even though he loved me. But like my children will say to me when they were younger, you love me because you have to, Mom. You're my mom. And that's what I thought about God. And I'm sure I communicated that to my kids because I didn't know this when they were growing up in their earlier years.
And this is going to catch all kinds of flack maybe, but it's really easier to love them when they're 3, 4, and 5 than 13, 14, and 15, 23, 24, 25. And I think to your point about that, if we're not experiencing, if I believe that as God's son and you believe as God's daughters, you have to be obedient, you have to be compliant, you have to be good, then you're really talking about conditional love.
Yeah.
And our kids are going to take us to places where it will test and try whether or not we, as their moms and dads, are unconditionally in love with them. Not just loving them, but like in the same bucket. We're in it with you. And if you're not experiencing that, as old Professor Howard Hendricks, seminary professor, it's impossible to give what you don't have. It's impossible to offer what you don't possess. I think you're really offering a bit of the magic trick of getting your heart back. You're describing the good that God was up to in your life and in my life and in our friends' lives was this shift from a religiousness, from yes, he loves me, but into no, he loves me. And here's how he's showing me. Cece's Pizza, really, Rebecca? That's your he loves you story? Yes, it is. Absolutely. And on. To know that experientially, God's love, I think that's a powerful idea as we look at motherhood and mothering. I think about how little ones often run to mom when they're hurt. I'm talking about 2, 3, 4. And it's mom who's going to make this feel better.
Our 20-year-olds still come to me first.
I was just thinking that.
You know, and that's a testimony of something really good that you're actually talking about. How many boys and girls in their teenage years or in their 20s don't go to mom anymore? Well, how their hearts were handled can be part of that. And number 2, what the enemy has convinced them of, that what they're going to get if they go to mom or dad is somehow some kind of guilt, shame, conditional disappointment. So this is a huge idea of what you've experienced. It will flow through you to them as a mom. And that's why we're saying we're such advocates of getting your heart back, healing for the brokenness. I mean, we all had moms and we all had dads. And here we are with adult children or almost adulting children. And we look back and go, okay, oh my gosh, what did we do? What do they need counseling for? What do they need to recover from? Because we are sensitive to that. We want to make that right. And I want to shift to that conversation because you said some words that were pretty powerful on the negative side, how we've wounded our kids, controlling.
Diminishing.
Diminishing.
I miss their hearts.
So how many of us even could avoid the idea of being a good girl or a good boy? I'll never forget when Gary shared that in a conference not long ago. Instead of being a loved boy and a loved girl, that's a different idea. The conditions are lifted and it's not be good and I'll love you. But yet that is what the enemy really wants to deliver to the packages of young hearts. And how do we know that? Those are the packages that got delivered to our hearts. Whether our mom and dads were on it, doggone it, or not. The enemy is committed to that program, to turning somehow, some way through the roles of moms and dads, because that's what a young heart first sees in terms of protection, provision, beauty, and strength, loving them. And they're trying to sort it out. How does this work? Oh, if I do this, I get this. And then that has to be deconstructed in the kingdom. No. No matter what you do, I love you. The enemy and the culture together often are responsible for delivering those packages. And I think as we move into this very sensitive subject, how have we reinforced the enemy's message to our sons and daughters as moms? Because dads don't ever do that. But as moms, no, in the shared responsibility of parenting, yes, we have regrets. I'm not trying to bring that up for this, but in a motherhood conversation, how has God brought you, how's he shown you some of the wounding that has been experienced by your children and the work of restoration? Go figure, right? In the kingdom, there's restorative and redemptive work, and you get to be a part of that with your kids for the moments you missed or the moments, no, you didn't miss them. You just over the top. Whoa. Parachute in, kids are all, mom's freaking out.
Mm-hmm. That's how I would describe myself with the girls growing up. I have described myself many times as I was freak out mom. I was the yeller. I would yell and diminish them. They were upsetting my peace and my world, and it was very hard to handle. So I know I crushed their little hearts with how I said certain things and what I said, but I know I was very diminishing. So in those earlier years with him growing up, that was the overtly felt presence, just being freak out mom. And I would typically apologize not too long after. But it's been in more recent years as our daughters have grown and in their 20s, even in their later teens, where they're more vocal and felt free to be honest with, this is how you hurt me, Mom. And
you invited a lot.
They would talk about it themselves, and I'd be in the room, and it's safer for them to share some of that in numbers, amongst themselves with me being there. But yes, I have invited, as I have invited God to show me areas in my own life where I still need healing, I've become more aware of, yes, I've hurt you. I want to know. I just told Ashley that a couple days ago because she shared with me that God's revealing more to her. There's more that is coming up and more that she wants to share with me. And it's one of those things that you hear that you go, crap. But I want that. I want that for her to be able to share that with me. And I want that for me. So I do invite that.
And what I want to say to the listeners too is that's not a formula thing either. I mean, there's times when we've gone there with our daughters and found clarity, like what they perceived and what they thought was very real to them, but it may not necessarily have been the truth.
But if they felt it, it was their reality.
Significant.
And it's
so we
very
want to go
significant.
there. That's right.
Yes.
So there's the tension. That's how they interpreted what you did or didn't do. And again, there's an enemy that's whispering, you're not absolved from responsibility. I think that's the great point is you're not absolved of the responsibility. If they want to come and have that conversation with, can I ask you some questions? Here's what I felt. Here's what I heard. Your posture's not, well, wait a minute. It's the invitation to tell me your heart.
And
and I will be entrusted with it in a way that I want to show you how much I love you in that care.
I'm learning that because my default is to defend myself. My default is to give reasons why that happened and why I did that. What I am learning how to do is say, I am so sorry. I am so sorry I missed you. I'm so sorry I missed your heart. I'm so sorry I diminished you like that.
Yeah,
and ask for their
but mom was
forgiveness.
busy, but dad had left, or but what? Anything other than that.
It's not an
really
apology.
kinda
It
cheapens
doesn't.
the
It does.
apology.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, all right, Sherry, Rebecca, what about you guys? This isn't really that fun, to talk about hurting our kids or wounding our kids, but it's
important.
It's the other side of the coin. The opportunity to love them. How else can you teach your kids how to apologize? Or how to admit when you miss them. And so it's not my favorite training module as a dad, and it can't be as a mom. And yet we're actually putting this in the category of what are some of the good things God's showing you of how we've wounded our kids.
Well, it also can be a wonderful opportunity for restoration in your relationship.
Right. And we talked about that
And
already.
that's a beautiful thing.
Restoration.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So how about you, ladies?
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things that I've really loved about the Deepening Weekend and Zoweh is learning to see our stories in movies. Because I had no idea, I didn't even see this coming, as Scott, Stephen, and I went to go see the movie Inside Out back in 2015. And I'm thinking, this is just a cartoon. This is going to be fun. And I didn't realize until I'm sitting there and I'm watching this story about a young girl whose family is moved from Minnesota to San Francisco and how that landed on her heart. And it's told through, just interestingly enough, her emotions. So joy and sadness and anger, disgust and fear. I was in tears because it brought me back to 2006, coming out of that single parent season when Scott and I came back together and our marriage was restored. And in our delight, in our excitement, in, oh my gosh, isn't this incredible? Look what God has done, all the healing and the restoration and the redemption. And so we're going to pick up our family from Connecticut and we're going to move to North Carolina, and it's going to be a fresh start and a new life, and it's going to be beautiful. Never slowed down to take Stephen's temperature on this, to pursue his heart in this. How do you feel about leaving everything that you've known, family, friends, school, house, the only house he's ever lived in, to go to this rural place where we don't know anybody really and start all over again? My heart was broken, and it really gave me the opportunity after that movie to turn to Stephen and just say, oh my gosh, I am so sorry. I never slowed down to even ask you. I really pulled the entire family into this place of delight and joy and happiness, and oh, isn't this great?
Yeah. And I know that story from you. You didn't start with I'm sorry. Joy, one of the characters in there, you started to see something in you.
Yeah.
And sadness, she's in there in this cartoon, this beautiful story. And there's more. I just want you to elaborate a little bit, because there was more to, I'm sorry I missed your heart. No, something prompted you to even present the idea to Stephen about this
because
move.
Someone had asked me to explore my false self.
Yeah, so it's even a bigger context, right?
Right. So I was just thinking in the context of Stephen and how I had totally missed his heart. But at the same time, God was showing me that in this effort to arrange my world, I am one to go right to joy. I am the joyful one.
And therefore try to pull everybody else to happiness and joy.
Drag them, absolutely.
That's my job.
Absolutely. That's who I am. That's what I do.
And that's what was shown in
Need a book?
in the film.
Need a scripture? I got it.
Inside
I
Out.
gotcha.
Right.
So gosh, there are so many facets to that. What I learned about me in the midst of that, and what I was dismantling in the midst of that, realizing I didn't have to operate that way. I wasn't created to operate that way. And so how that changed my heart. But at the same time, being able to pursue Stephen's heart and ask him those questions and hear his heart and be able to seek his forgiveness.
And that's when the I'm sorry got to come out.
Yeah.
Was when you felt like you might have missed. And that this way is not always the way. The joy,
the only card
component,
you play.
and to pull people from their sadness, it's not a bad thing. But if you miss their heart, he was grieving. I would love our listeners to know that this isn't necessarily even a story about mothering and the mother's heart. What this was a story about, and I like what you said earlier, Robin, it trickled down to my mother's heart, my mothering, when you were preparing a talk for a women's conference on our false self ways. And it's amazing how we can actually see this in others often better than we can see it in our own lives. But the real work is walking with God into your own story to find these false self ways, these ways to protect, to promote, to provide, and how this can be an inappropriate card at an inappropriate time. That's what we're really talking about. It's not bad to want people to not feel sad, but to not get into their tears with them, to not mourn with them, to not experience and grieve with them the sadness. And so God's showing you something he wants to heal in your heart. And the ramifications of that becomes a healing moment in Stephen's. Is that fair?
Right, absolutely.
I think
and
it's crazy.
Seeing how the
I think
false
it's
self
amazing.
wounds. I mean, I had no idea.
Right.
No idea that was operating. Because she did such a great job, Simi.
It's a good story, Sherry.
You're all looking at me as if I cannot delay my vulnerability any longer. So where to start? I am actually really loving parenting now, even though it is the hardest thing ever. But what I'm loving is that God has brought me to a new place in my parenting within the past I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years. And it does have to do with my understanding that I am loved without any contingencies. I don't have to be afraid of failure because it's not going to change my standing in God's eyes. And so therefore, since I have no fear of failure, no need to jockey and measure up and earn my value through my mothering, then I can offer my children this kind of love, offer them freedom from fear of failing, knowing that it won't change their standing in my heart or my family. Consequences are something different, of course. Training often utilizes the consequences, the natural consequences of our choices, but it doesn't change our standing. And my parenting has just radically changed in the past 5 years. Whereas before, I was very much focused on control, consistency, desired outcomes. And desired outcomes, that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, you're the only one that suffers from that.
Yeah.
Suffers from that. So we'll have another podcast with just you. But you're implying that this fear of failure is something you struggled with.
Yes.
And something God brought restoration and healing to. And now you're making the shift of, I don't want my children to suffer under that like I did.
Right.
You're aware of it. And that is a huge idea. I love that. And so they get a mom who is not wanting good boys and good girls, but loved boys and loved girls, who fear isn't the final voice or the verdict, that there's freedom instead. And because you've been experiencing that journey of, what'd you say, 5 years?
Yeah. Oh, and it's still very
of getting
much
free from that?
Ongoing.
Yeah. It's continually something I pray about.
Okay, so I'm going to jump to a question, and I want you to finish any thoughts you have. But for those mothers out there who feel like their children are the verdict on them, what would you three say? I think you're heading there, but I want to make sure we go there as we wrap this up. What would you say to moms, the mother's heart, who feels that my children's behavior, their grades, their ability to at recitals or in competition, on teams. I mean, these are all boyhood and girlhood seasons, and then their choices in junior high and high school. Is it fair to say that that's a prominent thing that we suffer from as parents? But as a mother, how are you overcoming that with God's help? How's God showing you that, first of all? Because some people, as you said, you thought you were helping Stephen in pulling him from this sad place. It's going to be great. Come on, let's make it great. When what he shared with you, I just needed you to hear me and know that I was hurting. It wasn't great for me, Mom. And then to say, I'm sorry, I missed your heart. I'd love to do that over again. But how do we share this? They're not the verdict on you.
I know for me, when I felt that, and when the invitation is to feel that way, that what my daughters or a daughter is doing, how that could negatively reflect on me and the kind of mother I am and the job I'm doing as a mother, reflects an unsettled heart in me. And that's something that God has been doing in me as I become more and more aware of who I am and how God sees me and how beloved I am and how delighted in me He is. Life in the kingdom and what He really has for me and the glory of my life, understanding more of that and how I uniquely reflect His glory, just kind of all the things we're learning about life in the kingdom. It settles my heart more in every way, one area being that of a mom. So I'm more free to offer. As a mom, I'm more free to love my kids without demanding that they perform a certain way or being careful to reflect me in a positive way. So I think it speaks to settledness and a settled heart and how free are we really, and our true self, false self. If we're living from our truest self, we're free.
Yeah, and we know who that is because God has shown us, told us,
Right.
invited us. I mean, this all started, Rebecca, because you used the phrase fear of failure.
Mm-hmm.
in your life?
And it's an epidemic.
And how do
It's
we
an
not
epidemic problem
transfer
for
that
mothers,
to
especially.
them?
Yeah. And so many women, as women, not even as mothers, live with fear of failure.
That's great.
I mean, this is
That's not
a
great, but
problem,
that's a
right?
very insightful.
This is a problem. Yeah. So to the extent that we know we're loved regardless, that I know that I'm an original, that the ultimate responsibility for my children, for their choices, is not up to me. My responsibility is live freely as I can in the love of God and offer them as much as I can offer them without contingencies and entrust them to the Holy Spirit's work within them. What I offer from that place will be so much more life-giving than what I can possibly come up with regimen and control and consistency. And there'll be no heart in it. And we were made for the heart part. We were made for the connection. And it's what God wants from us more than any other thing. So how can we train our children to love God with all their heart, soul, mind, and strength above all else and value it above any other thing if we haven't mirrored that for them in our relationship? Like, that's what's the most important thing to us. Like, you are held, child of mine. No matter what you do, you are a child of mine. I love you, and I'm going to walk with you in whatever choice you make. Yes, there will be consequences, and I don't wish those for you. But I'm not afraid of your failure because God isn't afraid of mine. He can upend all of those in beautiful ways.
That's awesome.
And I know Rebecca's
That is
saying
good.
this. I just want to make, because we don't want to put the conditions on it. And I know you're not doing that. So often that verse can be heard that it's this idea of me doing that toward the Father rather than being in that with the Father, with the mother heart of God. So being in love with God, heart, mind, body. And so he is that. Anytime I even smell hints of that, I have to move and make sure that we're really clear for our friends and allies. And I know Rebecca's heart, so I know she would want this, that this is about the love affair with God. And if you're having it as a mother, you're modeling it for your children. If you're living in fear as a mother, as a woman, then you are going to get some of that, if not a lot of that, on them. And so what we've discovered more and more is being loved by the Father, being loved unconditionally, and experiencing that kind of love has transformed us. So what do we believe about our kids? That's their only real hope that will transform them. What we did, what we didn't do as parents, where we missed them. Because let's be honest, this story, right, the love story in the midst of a fierce battle, they're in that story too. Mama bears, polar bears, penguins, sooner or later, and probably sooner than later, this mother's heart is ushering this little heart into the world, not with good luck, I'll see you later, but with I'm here. I'm always here. I love you. And you step into the next stage and phase of their life with a mother's heart, showing them what it is to walk with God, inviting them, praying over them and for them to walk with God. How's that been overcome for you, Sherry? You started with Inside Out. How's that been worked out in Stephen's not the verdict on you, and how you have been invited to love him like God loves you?
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I think back, almost a year ago, just sitting with some wise women and friends, and parenting an adult child is different. They're out there, they're making their own decisions, their own choices, and you do feel a little bit like the verdict on you. And so to have Lee Barkalow, whose children are older than all of our children, she broke it down so simply. She said, just love him. Love him, pursue his heart and where he's going and what he's doing, and walk alongside him and just love him. He knows what you think. He knows what you feel. You know, you've raised him up. He knows where you are on all these things. Just love him. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so simple.
No, it's not. No,
But
it's not.
It's
But it
a
does
lot
bottom
less
line.
daunting.
It's so good.
It's so
so good.
less daunting to know I
mean,
just have to love him and
yeah.
invite his heart.
All of our children have questioned God, whether he exists, whether he's good. All of our children have questioned
Or are questioning, currently questioning.
morality, ethics. just like we did.
Right.
But when you're their parents, when you're their mom,
When you're that close.
it can feel like mistakes they're making
Mm-hmm.
somehow mean I did it wrong. What is the enemy going to whisper in that? What is he going to do to
Right.
bring unsettledness or fear to your heart? Because he knows how it works. I want to end with, moms, you are so important. The mother heart of God, the mothering ways in which children that are yours biologically, children that are yours that you adopt, children that aren't yours in any of that respect can be so significantly impacted, will be so significantly impacted. The question is for what? For which kingdom? And you three have done that incredibly well in your own makeover, in your own restoration, in your own remodeling of walking with God. However,
Which is ongoing.
which is ongoing. Because again, I love that you said that, Robin. We've never been here before.
Mm-mm.
Right.
It's always
You've never
new.
been here before as moms.
Mm-hmm.
But from my friend behind me, SJ, right? Happy Mother's Day. Happy Mother's Day, moms. Last word gets to be yours as moms. Last sentence. How would you encourage moms? What's your encouraging word to moms as moms for Mother's Day?
Mine is find the joy and strength of discovering your own unique self and just offer that as fiercely and passionately and lightheartedly as you possibly can.
Mm. I would say love lavishly as you have been loved. Laugh with your children and ask questions. I wished I had asked a lot more questions with them growing up and not talked at them so much or tried to take advantage of every teachable moment to teach them and talk at them, but ask questions and listen to their hearts.
Mm-hmm. And I think I would just add that today's a new day, that there are no regrets, that God's mercies and grace, all of it is new today. Today is a new opportunity for you to move toward your children and invite them, ask those questions, live fiercely who God has created you to be. Don't waste another day. Today is a good day to start.
Yeah.
That's good.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom.
We'll be back next week with one more installment on the Mother's Heart podcast series. And we're going to get some of the men in the room to talk about this. But you guys have laid more than a foundation. You've done an incredible job of sharing your hearts, your journeys, your stories, and the importance of this role as a woman. And I think the men will bring this other angle, the importance of this role to a man's heart and to his journey, and the importance of being loved well by moms. Happy Mother's Day out there, all you moms and all you men who are in this battle, in this love story with them. Hopefully this has helped you to hear and see and feel some of the things that God may want you to know as a man, as a husband, as a father, and whatever your dynamic in your family is right now. Hope that this will equip you for the courage needed to step in and play your part well as men. So happy Mother's Day, everybody. We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Exploring More. The landing page for this podcast is zoweh.org/podcast. That's ZOWEH.org/podcast, where you can find the show notes and various platforms to which we broadcast. You can also find us and the Life of More by visiting Zoweh on YouVersion Bible app, Right Now Media, our Facebook page, and Zoweh on Instagram and Twitter. Remember, with God there is always more, and you were made for more.